Another thing from Biden, speaking of very politically unpopular, here's Biden yesterday addressing teachers. And I want you to listen to what he says here. And speaking of midterms, one thing I'll say is that I really hope that Joe Biden takes this message and the Democrats, they take this messaging and take it right into the midterms. Please do. I beg you. Listen to this.
Have the best educated public in the world. Have our students gain confidence enough to know what they can do, to reach in. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to help them teach and reach their potential. You've heard me say it many times about our children, but it's true. They're all our children. And the reason you're the teachers of the year is because you recognize that. They're not somebody else's children. They're like yours when they're in the classroom. You represent a profession that helps them gain the confidence they believe they can do anything.
They're not somebody else's children. They're yours when they're in the classroom. Please, Joe, that's a winner. Yeah, please take that all the way into the midterms. They're not, and what does he mean by somebody else's? He means the parents. They're not somebody else's. The parents. No, they're your children because they're in the classroom. And this is not a gaffe. He didn't misspeak here. That's exactly what Democrats think. That is precisely the leftist position, is that when the kids are in the classroom, they're in the government classrooms, government building, government school system, and that means that they belong to the government. That is their position. They're not usually quite that explicit about it, but they get pretty close. And this is a moment when Joe Biden was very explicit about it. That's how they see it. You send your children to us, and they are ours. And not only when they're in the classroom, by the way, but even when they leave. They're still ours. That's how they see it. And it's good. It's very good to know. Now, they're wrong about that, of course. You are entrusted, if you're a teacher in a public school classroom, depending on what grade level, you might have the kids entrusted to you for 45 minutes at a time. You have a different group of kids with 45 minutes, and they are entrusted to you for a specific purpose, not as an adoptive parent, it's not as foster care, not even as daycare. At least that's not what schools are supposed to be, even though they're treated that way. You are simply entrusted to impart certain information to the kids on a certain subject. That's all you're supposed to be doing. That's your whole job. And not to say that it's a small or minor thing. It's quite a noble job to do and an important one. If you actually do the job you're supposed to do and take it seriously. And don't try to do more than that job by taking these children under your wing and turning them into your own kind of de facto children, because they're not. But it is crucial for us to understand that this is how the government education system sees it. And when you send your kids to the school, even though they are still your kids, you are sending them into a system that believes that they have ownership of the parental rights that actually belong to you. All right, speaking of which, from the Daily Wire, Rhode Island Democrats are pushing legislation that would teach children about pleasure-based sexual relations. Pleasure-based sexual relations with the support of left-wing groups. The legislation, Senate Bill 2285, would amend current law so that culturally appropriate courses in, quote, family life or sex education are taught to children beginning in sixth grade when students are about 11 or 12 years old. Quote, teachings would recognize pleasure-based sexual relations, different sexual orientations, and be inclusive of same-sex relationships. The act would also provide that instruction include gender expression, gender identity, and the harm of negative gender stereotypes. This is what they want to do in Rhode Island. Rhode Island State Senator Tiara Mack, a Democrat representing Providence, one of the primary sponsors of the bill, has cited her Southern abstinence-only sex education as a reason for pushing SB 2285. She said there was no conversation about what it meant to be gay or what a healthy relationship looked like. Sex education is about learning about gender and gender roles, about what it's like to grow up in a single-parent family. It's about all the things I wish I had gotten. It's about knowing I wasn't alone. That's what she says. And in fact, Tiara Mack, I think we have video of her. She was interviewed and talking a little bit about this pleasure-based sex ed, and here's what she has to say about that.
An opportunity came up to teach sex ed through a program at the university called Sexual Health Advocacy through Peer Educators, to teach sex ed to local high school students. And I did that my sophomore year. After applying my freshman year, I'm like, well, if I didn't know this, like, there are people out there like me who literally have no idea how to talk about their body, how to access agency, and how to actually practice autonomy in whatever way they want to do it. And for me, that was unlocking conversations about my body, my sexuality, and my identity in a safe and culturally sensitive and respectful environment. And also sharing that with 15-year-olds who at the time are yearning to have that conversation. And I taught sex ed all throughout the rest of my college career. And then I went to go on to teach high school math, and I still was teaching sex education. And at the same time, still working on issues surrounding reproductive health rights and access, from local abortion funding work and to now being on the board of an abortion fund and being an employee of Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. It's been a core of my work.
Yeah, so that's what she wants. That's what she thinks sex ed should be. It should be about, as she said in the article, it's about knowing I'm not alone. It's about discovering your body, or whatever else she's talking about. No, sex ed is not supposed to be any of that. And in fact, there should. We're at a point now where you just have to get sex ed out of the schools completely, for every grade level. K through 12, no sex ed of any kind. Get it all out. This is not, no. I'm not saying let's have abstinence-only education instead of this, instead of the so-called comprehensive sex education. No, I don't want that either. I don't need. If I sent my kids to public school, which I don't, but if I did, I wouldn't need teachers talking to my kids about how to abstain from sex and the advantages of that. That's not a conversation that I'm going to trust to strangers. Okay, I can have that conversation. I don't need you to do it. I don't trust you to do it. But of course, we're way beyond abstinence education, and they want this, which is on the total other end of the spectrum. My point is, just take the whole spectrum and throw it out. We just cannot trust these perverts to have conversations with kids about sex at all. Okay, so there should be no subject, no course called sex ed. You want to talk about reproduction? You talk about that in biology. You want to talk about the anatomy? Talk about that. That's also a science discussion. So you can cover those. But anything beyond that, even if in theory, there could be a version of a sex ed class that's appropriate in theory, which I haven't even heard what that version would be. Even if you could, in theory, figure out such a curriculum, you cannot trust the teachers to do it. You just can't, as we see here. Because they have taken this, keep something else in mind here, that for them, sex and their sex life and their sexual orientation and their gender identity, like that's their whole existence. That's everything. That's all they care about. So everything gets wrapped up in that. That's also their religion. And that's why she says, sex is about knowing, sex ed's about knowing yourself and knowing you're not alone. And what? What does knowing you're not alone have to do with sex ed? What are you talking about? Well, it's because her whole identity and life and everything is wrapped up in sex. And that's yet another reason why you can't trust these people to talk to your kids about sex. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.